after July 1st and before Election Day in a presidential election year. Only 4 times in the history of this country has a Supreme Court vacancy arisen within 4 months of a presidential election. The next number, I think, is very important to remember, and that number is 0. 0. That's how many times these vacancies were filled. In fact, similar to this vacancy, President Lincoln had a Senate majority when a vacancy arose just weeks before Election Day in 1864. And what did he do? He chose to wait. President Lincoln thought nominating a justice so close to an election would delegitimize our institutions and harm the republic that he was fighting so hard to preserve. That's the precedent that President Trump and Senate Republicans have disregarded as they quickly plotted to fill this seat just hours, if not minutes, after Justice Ginsburg's passing. In addition to breaking with this historical precedent, Republicans are also jamming through their nomination in the middle of a pandemic that is gripping our country. Instead of prioritizing Michigan first responders, small businesses, workers, teachers, and families and healthcare professionals that are still suffering through the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, Senate Republicans and the president are instead laser focused on jamming through a Supreme Court nominee for a lifetime appointment. This is more than just political gamesmanship. This nominee will significantly impact the lives of Michiganders and folks all across our country. We know that the Supreme Court is set to shortly consider a case that has far-reaching ramifications for people's health care. The Trump administration is arguing in court that the Affordable Care Act should be overturned in a case that will come before the Supreme Court in November, just 7 days after Election Day. If the Trump administration gets its way in this lawsuit, we could go back to the days when insurance companies once again call the shots on people's health care. Over 4 million Michiganders with pre-existing health care conditions could be denied coverage. Seniors could be charged more for prescription drugs. Lifetime and annual limits on coverage could make costs unaffordable, and as a result, force families into bankruptcy. Before the passage of the Affordable Care Act, medical debt was the #1 reason for personal bankruptcy. People faced financial devastation simply because they got sick. Women could again be charged more for being a woman because a potential pregnancy is a pre-existing condition. We have come way too far to be turning the clock backwards. For the Trump administration to be pushing this lawsuit is reckless and dangerous, especially during the worst public health and economic crisis in generations. But that's not all that's at stake. A woman's right to make her own healthcare decisions and reproductive freedom is at stake. Workers' rights against corporate special interest are at stake. Environmental justice is at stake. Access to the ballot box is at stake. Attempts to end the corrosive effect of money in campaigns and elections is at stake. And LGBTQ rights are at stake. Those are just some of the many issues that a Supreme Court justice with a lifetime appointment will be ruling on for decades to come. Judge Amy Coney Barrett's nomination has extremely far-reaching consequences. We are just a few days from Election Day. Already over 2 million Michiganders have voted, and many more are voting as I speak here today. With all that's at stake, Michiganders deserve a say in who nominates and confirms the next justice to our nation's highest court. And the fact that Michiganders are being denied this opportunity is simply unacceptable. Therefore, I cannot support this nomination process. It should wait until a new president and Senate take office following an election to take place in only a few days. So for this reason and many others, I will not be voting for Judge Barrett's confirmation and will cast a no vote. So, Mr. President, here we are. Instead of bringing folks together to find common ground on coronavirus relief, our country is being forced to go through a divisive Supreme Court nomination process. It simply did not have to be this way. I continue to stand ready to roll up my sleeves and put together a comprehensive, bipartisan, and meaningful COVID relief package. Ask any Michigander what they're worried about today, and you're going to get the same answers from them. They're worried about being able to put food on the table or a roof over their head. They're worried about getting or keeping a job to support their families. They're worried about catching a virus that has killed over 7,000 of their fellow Michiganders and over 220,000 people all across our nation. They are worried if they survive a COVID infection, it will compromise their health for the rest of their lives. They will have a pre-existing condition. So I ask, why isn't this pandemic the Senate's top priority right now? When we passed the CARES Act, we came together. We put politics aside and passed a real comprehensive package that helped keep millions of people stay afloat. We need to summon that spirit again. Michiganders are counting on us. Americans across this country are counting on us. Mr. President, I implore my colleagues to drop what we are doing and let's come together and pass a meaningful bipartisan COVID relief package. And let's get that done now. Mr. President, I yield.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I rise today as more than 220,000 Americans are dead from the coronavirus. There are more than 4 million fewer jobs than when Donald Trump took office. We are still squarely in the middle of this pandemic and an economic crisis, the likes of which we have not seen since the Great Depression. In recent weeks, cases of the coronavirus have risen dramatically in my home state of New Mexico and frankly across the entire country. Everyone is rightly worried about whether our schools and our child care centers, our small businesses can acquire the resources and the equipment they need to reopen safely. We still don't have enough resources or even a national plan for testing and contact tracing, much less for treatments and the eventual nationwide distribution of a FDA-approved vaccine that would allow us to finally get a handle on this virus. And if we don't pass real economic relief in the coming weeks, many families in New Mexico will face desperate choices between paying their bills, keeping a roof over their heads, or putting food on the table. And yet, here we are, using valuable time on a Supreme Court confirmation process that should have never been taken up before the election. Senate Republicans say they aren't going to negotiate another coronavirus relief package. They say it's more important to ram a Supreme Court nominee through a broken and nakedly political process than it is to help the people that we were all elected to serve. Clearly, nothing, not even the lives and livelihoods of the American people, will get in the way of their power grab designed to reward their biggest donors and the most extreme interests. Well, let me say this clearly. I disagree. There is still so much we need to do to stop the spread of the coronavirus and support families, workers, businesses who are struggling and rebuild our communities. Let's move to that urgent action. But with Senate Republicans refusing to do that, let's discuss in real terms what they're doing instead. Considering and confirming Supreme Court nominees is one of a senator's most solemn duties under the Constitution. We are supposed to take it seriously, deliberately. But Senate Republicans have thrown out the rule book. It started when, with nearly a full year remaining in President Obama's final term, Senate Republicans refused to even hold hearings on Merrick Garland, the nominee to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia. Then they dismantled the rules that had ensured that both parties would have a seat at the table on Supreme Court nominations. And then they bull rushed the vetting process for Justice Kavanaugh's lifetime appointment to the court, despite multiple credible allegations of sexual misconduct. After all of that, I suppose it should have come as no real surprise that Majority Leader McConnell waited less than an hour after the announcement of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death to say that he was going to push the envelope even further. So here we are. Leader McConnell and Republicans are now forcing the Senate to rush through another partisan Supreme Court confirmation battle, mere weeks, now mere days, before Election Day. They are shamelessly discarding their own precedents, breaking their own rules, abandoning their own words. And they are trampling on the legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Before her death, Justice Ginsburg told her granddaughter that her most fervent wish was that her seat wouldn't be filled until after the next president is inaugurated. Justice Ginsburg served on our nation's highest court for nearly 3 decades and worked for decades before that to move our country's laws towards greater equality. She understood that the American people must trust that the Supreme Court justices are acting above the partisan politics of the moment. The next presidential election is now less than 2 weeks away. Millions of Americans have already voted for their next president and their next senators. I believe that these Americans deserve a voice in this process. In the words of Majority Leader McConnell himself, as reported in the Washington Post on February 18th, 2016, quote, "Given that we are in the midst of a presidential election process, the American people should seize the opportunity to weigh in on whom they trust to nominate the next person for a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court." The Senate should follow that precedent and should allow voters to decide who should fill this Supreme Court seat. So what has changed for Majority Leader McConnell? Well, in the last decade, the court has made razor-thin 5-4 rulings on women's rights, on LGBTQ rights, on workers' rights, immigration, voting rights, civil rights, climate change, and much else. Now, my Republican colleagues will say that these decisions were made by activist judges and that all they want are judges who will call balls and strikes. But what they really want are judges who will make those calls consistently biased towards wealth and power rather than towards people. For all the talk of activist judges, it is my Republican colleagues who are right now attempting to add one whopper of an activist to the Supreme Court. Next month, the Supreme Court will take up President Trump's case to eliminate the Affordable Care Act in its entirety. That's right. In the middle of this pandemic that has now killed more than 220,000 Americans and infected millions more, the Supreme Court is taking up a case that could eliminate health care coverage for millions of Americans. Now, Judge Barrett refused to answer questions about the Affordable Care Act during her confirmation hearings last week. But her views on the healthcare law are clear, and they are exposed in the public record. Judge Barrett has repeatedly and publicly criticized the Affordable Care Act. She has said that the Supreme Court should have already invalidated it. If Senate Republicans have their way, she will have the opportunity to do just that. And what would it mean if the Supreme Court overturns the Affordable Care Act? It means bringing back discrimination, higher costs, even outright denial of coverage for more than 800,000 New Mexicans living with pre-existing conditions like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and now COVID-19. I am particularly worried about what this would mean for the people in Indian country who have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. In New Mexico, tribal nations have experienced heartbreaking losses, and healthcare resources in the tribal communities have been incredibly strained. I have lost friends and mentors in Indian country, and I know others who are still struggling to recover from this virus. I can't even imagine how much worse this situation could become if the health coverage provided by the Affordable Care Act were ripped away. When we passed the Affordable Care Act, I fought hard to include a permanent reauthorization.
Liberal scholars and mainstream middle-of-the-road scholars. Put that commission together and have them do an analysis of what, if any, changes should take place in how the court functions, how it's picked, that's how it's picked, how long you stay in the court, how long, whether or not, for example, there was an idea put forward by one of the scholars out of Columbia saying that what you should do is you go Supreme Court for X number of years, then you go to a circuit court. And then someone from the circuit court goes to spin. Yeah. But there's all kinds of things. But here's what I think we have to do. I'm not a big fan of court packing. I'm not a big fan of saying we're just going to add X number. But I'm going to listen to all the ideas they have, because it's become a serious question going into the middle of the 21st century. And a lot of scholars are considering alternatives to how we presently proceed. And I'm going to ask them to report back to me, assuming I'm elected, in 180 days, and we'll decide whether to do anything. But here's one thing: no questions for the press. You're a pain in the neck. This guy, I love him. He's always the first guy to ask a question. I'm going to do one with you. Okay, thank you. But here's the deal. One of the things that is important is that
we're going to move. Come on.
Keep in mind, although they're going to vote on
Keep moving. Yeah, we're going to move. You guys, we're going to move back over here. Back that line, please. We're going to preset, guys.
Sorry.
Good. He's going to give remarks. He'll probably take a few questions. So.
Good? Yeah.
You okay?